Good day everyone! Welcome ulit sa ating psychological assessment lecture. At ngayon, i-discuss ko sa inyo yung Module 2 entitled Principles of Psychological Testing and the underlying topics, skills of measurement, statistical interpretation of test scores, measure of central tendency, measure of variability, the norms, test reliability and validity, item analysis, and the IRT, or the item response theory. So, bago natin simulan yung discussion, i-discuss ko muna sa inyo kung ano ba yung objective upon the completion of this module or upon the completion of this discussion. So, una, to describe the basic principle of psychological assessment and testing. Pangalawa, to describe the statistical foundation of psychological assessment and testing. So, let's go now to our learning activities, the measurement and statistics. Statistical interpretation of test scores. So, yung ating test scores can be described using descriptive statistics, procedure used to summarize and describe a set of data in a quantitative term where complete population data are available. So, for example, I have my research at ang gusto kong pag-aralan ay level of anxiety among CLSU college students. So, pwede nating gamitin doon yung descriptive statistics. Kukuha tayo ng sample at pwede natin na i-generalize yung makukuha nating data dun sa ating sample to describe yung level ng anxiety ng CLSU college students. How about the inferential statistics? Ito naman ay process or procedure na gumagamit o ginagamitan ng drawing inferences upon the properties and characteristics of population from the sample data. Inferences are logical deductions about things that cannot be observed directly. Diba? So, punta naman tayo sa scales of measurement. So, a measurement scale differentiate people from each other on any one variable. So, enable for us to know the to know the difference between two people, we can use scales of measurement. So, variable. Ano ba yung variable? Variable is a factor or property, attribute, characteristic, or behavior dimensions along which people or objects differ. So, we have here physical dimension, the length or weight, and the second one is the psychological dimension, which is, for example, is the intelligence, self-concept, self-esteem, diba? At karaniwan na ginagamit natin sa ating research ay na variable ay ang mga psychological variables, diba? Example, to know the level of stress, happiness, diba? And ngayon naman describe natin yung mga different scales na ginagamit natin or different scales of measurement. So, number one is the nominal scale. Si nominal scale, numbers are used to classify and identify people or objects according to category or level. So, for example, I have 100 respondents sa aking research at gusto kong i-classify or i-categorize yung male and female. So, i-categorize ko si male as number 1 and si female as number 2, diba? Another example, we can administer an IQ test to a group of people and reclassify their scores such as below average, average, or above average, diba? In interpreting naman kasi ng ating intelligence quotient, talaga ang ginagamit natin ay below average, average, and above average. How about the interpretation or the limitation of the nominal scale? Siyempre, ang nominal scale kasi hindi nagpo-provide yan ng precise information about the individual differences. For example, si person A, ang IQ niya ay 102 and si person B, ang IQ niya ay 108, but 102 to 108 falls to the average level. So, hindi natin malalaman yung precise or exact differences nung dalawang persons. Okay, so yun yung limitation naman ng ating nominal scales. How about naman sa ordinal, yung ating ordinal scales? We classify people or objects by ranking them on some dimensions or in terms of their attributes that is being measured. For example, nagpa-exam si teacher, si person A ay 25, si person B ay 24, at si person C ay 20. So, kung ordinal scale yung gagamitin natin, sasabihin natin na si person A falls into the first place or the highest score, 'di ba? And si person B, si second at si person C ay si third, 'di ba? So ganun 'yon by level. Ano naman yung interpretation or limitation din ni ordinal? Hindi rin ini-indicate dito yung precise or extent by which the group members differ, 'di ba? Alam mo lang na mataas si person A kaysa kay person C, pero hindi mo alam kung gaano yung exact na level or measurement na kinataas niya dun kay person C. Okay? They do not provide then the type of individual differences information, just like the nominal scale. So, let's go now to our third scale, the interval scale. So, ang interval scale natin, kinaklasify natin yung people or objects by ranking them with an equal unit scale. So, ginagamit na natin yung exact or yung precise unit, 'di ba? ng ating for example, height, 'di ba? Hindi mo naman pwedeng sabihin na ilan yung height mo, 'di ba? Tall or kaya small, 'di ba? So exact yung sinasabi natin. For example, 5'2", 5'3", ganon. So interval scale din, yan yung kalimitan or kadalasan na ginagamit in our psychological research chess. So, interpretation and limitation. So, application natin dito, i-assume natin na merong tatlong tao, si person A, B, and C, at naka-receive sila ng 65, 55, and 45. If we are going to use interval scale, respectively, on a standardized test of anxiety, malalaman natin kung si person A ay 65, 'di ba? At si person B 55, si person C 55. So we can draw conclusions, 'di ba? Bakit kaya si person A mas mataas yung level of anxiety niya unlike kay person B at kay person C? So we can draw inferences using the interval scale. So the last one, the ratio scale. When we rank people or objects with an equal interval scale that has true 0 point. So yung true 0 point na to, ini-indicate lang na yung absence ng characteristic that we are being measured. So example, miles per hour, 'di ba? And application dito, yung ratio scale kasi very rare lang siyang gamitin in psychological measurement since it is impossible na sabihin natin na I have a zero anxiety, I have a zero happiness or zero stress, 'di ba? So, 'yun ang ating scales of measurement. So, punta naman tayo sa types of scores. Cross score, ito ay na-obtain natin directly sa test performance ng ating respondents, and usually meaningless si raw score unless gagawin natin siyang z-score or itatransform natin siya into other scales. Transform scores or derived scores, ito yung resulta kapag si raw score ay tinransform na natin or change na natin siya into for example, into T-score, 'di ba? And in order to facilitate analysis and interpretation of our data. So in linear transformation, the original raw score and transform score will be related in a linear manner as well. In describing score distribution, punta naman tayo sa ating frequency distribution. So, frequency distribution, it is the technique na ginagamit natin to display or represent yung mga score to show how frequently each value or data was obtained. And this distribution can also be shown graphically by plotting the frequencies as a frequency polygon or kaya naman ay histogram. So, let's go now to the properties of frequency distribution. Kapag sinabi natin na central location or central tendency, ito ay ang value ng measure natin near the center of distribution, which represents the average score of the group. So kapag sinabing mean, it is the average value that we have obtained by adding together a set of measurements and then dividing it by the numbers of measures in a set. So kapag naman sinabing median, ito yung middlemost score on the score na na-collect natin. Which 50% of the score fall. And sometimes it referred to as the 50th percentile or the 5th decile or naman kaya second quartile. So the mode, ito yung pinaka frequent score na na-obtain natin in most number of people. So, review na lang yan. How about the variation? Ito naman yung extent ng ating clustering about a central value or the dispersion, yung pagkakalayo-layo ng mga score around a given point. If all scores are close to the central value, their variation will be less if they tend to depart more markedly from the central values. So, kapag sinabi natin na range, ito yung pinakamaling i-measure kasi pagka gusto natin kunin yung range ng ating data, ima-minus lang natin yung ima-minus lang natin si smallest score from the largest score. How about the semi-interquartile range or the quartile deviation na tinatawag natin? So, this range is used as the index of variability when the distribution of scores is highly skewed. So, pag sinabing highly skewed, ano ba ang ibig sabihin nun? So, i-discuss natin ito sa mga susunod na slides. How about the ST or the standard deviation? Most commonly used measure of variability natin ito kasi ang SD natin, inaalam nito or pinapakita nito kung gaano nga ba ka-disperse yung mga score natin sa mean, di ba? The larger the standard deviation, the more widely scattered the score. And the SD is actually the square root of the variance. How about the variance? It is the measure of total amount of variability in the set of test score. So, si variance, ang ginagawa niya, dinedescribe niya kung gaano ka-random yung ating variable difference from its expected value, di ba? And si standard score, in-express niya yung person's performance in terms of his deviation from the mean. In standard deviation units, data are transformed into deviation units. So, punta naman tayo sa skewness, di ba? Yung skewness natin, this means that the symmetry or asymmetry of the frequency distribution. Kapag sinabi natin na positively skewed, 'di ba? Larger frequency tend to be concentrated toward the low end of the variable and smaller frequency toward the high end. So, for example, si teacher nagbigay siya ng exam at sinabi niya na yung distribution ay positively skewed, marami ang mababang score at kokonti lang yung high score, 'di ba? And si mean, in positively skewed, si mean ay larger kesa kay median. How about the negatively skewed? The larger frequencies are concentrated toward the high end of the scale and smaller frequencies toward the low end. So, ibig sabihin nito, si teacher na nagbigay ng exam at sinabi niya na yung distribution ay negatively skewed, masaya dapat yung mga students kasi ang high score ay marami at konti lang yung low score o yung mga bumagsak. And here in negatively skewed, median is larger than the mean. Normal curve naman is a distribution na yung niya ay bell shape. Larger frequencies are clustered around the average o sa mean natin. Mean, median, and mode o inside. How about the kurtosis? Kurtosis refers to the flatness or thickness of one distribution in relation to another. Pag sinabing leptokurtic, one distribution is more thick than normal. So, ibig sabihin niya, flat yung kanyang tails. So, pag platykurtic naman, less thick siya and uh, opposition siya ni leptokurtic. Pag naman sinabing mesokurtic, it is the normal distribution. Pag sinabi natin na norm reference versus criterion reference test, so pag-aralan natin to ngayon. Pag sinabing ang test ay criterion reference test, individual score is compared to an established standard or criterion. So, ibig sabihin, nag-test ka at yung resulta ng test mo ay hindi yun i-compare sa classmate mo. But, si teacher, meron na siyang standard criterion. Example niyan rin ay sa board exam, 'di ba? So sa ating board exam, hindi naman yan titignan yung score ng mga kasamahan mo na nag-exam in psychology. Ang tinitignan dyan ay kung naabot mo ba yung 75%, percent, 'di ba? So, how about the norm reference test? Dito naman sa norm reference test, yung score na ng ng individual na nag-take ng test ay kino-compare to other individual who have taken the test, often called standardization sample or the normative group. Diba? So, let's go now to the meaning and application of norms. So, standardization and norming. Pag sinabing standard ang test, 'di ba? So, ibig sabihin, nag-undergo siya sa standardization. It involves administering the constructed test to a large sample of people or the standardized sample selected as representative of the target population of persons for whom the test is intended, 'di ba? So, tinitingnan din dyan kung sino ba yung mga respondents na ginamit mo, 'di ba? In enable for the test na talagang matawag siya na standardized. At yung norms, tinatawag ito or nagre-refer ito sa performance of standardization. So, standardization sample na ginagamit natin to process standardizing the test, empirically established and presented in tabular form. Raw scores are converted to some form of derived scores or norms. So, punta naman tayo sa kinds of norms. So, developmental norms, ini-indicate lang dito how far along the normal development path the individual had progressed. For example, yung age norms natin, yung, for example, there is a test kasi na pang grade 4 lang, 'di ba? Or pang 7 years old lang, 'di ba? How about the mental age, 'di ba? So, based siya sa mental age ng examinee na magte-take ng exam. Yung grade norms or equivalence naman often used in interpreting educational achievement tests, 'di ba? Katulad nung elementary example, bago ka makapunta doon sa grade 4, kailangan mo muna mag-test, 'di ba? Ng kung applicable ka ba na ma-promote sa grade 4, 'di ba? So yun yung mga grade norms or equivalence. How about the within group norms? So individual performance is evaluated in terms of the performance of the most nearly comparable standardization group. So pag sinabi nating percentile, ano ba yung pinagkaiba nun sa percentage? Sa percentile, ine-express niya or dinidisplay niya yung position o yung rank mo, 'di ba? Ng score mo. For example, ay yung college admission test, 'di ba? Nakalagay doon example 86 percentile, 'di ba? Ibig sabihin, 86% ng population ang nataasan mo, 'di ba? Ng score mo. So, pero meron ding limitation ang percentile kasi inequality of their units, especially at the extremes of the distribution. Percentiles are derived scores expressed in terms of percentage of a person. So, kapag naman sinabi nating percentage score, ano lang siya, mathematical value niya na pine-present out of 100, 'di ba? So, for example, ang exam ay 1 to 100 at ang nakuha mo ay at ang passing ay 60%. So, ibig sabihin, 60% ng 100 yung minimum na score na dapat mong makuha. Diba? So, standard score. Sabi dito is address the limitation of unequal units of percentiles express a person's performance in terms of his scores deviation from the mean in standard deviation units. So, there are two kinds of standard scores transformation. So, the number one is the linear transformation. Ito yung score na nare-retain in their exam numerical relation of the original raw scores because they are computed by subtracting a constant or the mean from each raw score and then dividing the result by another constant or the standard deviation. So, linear transformation are often designated as standard score or the z-scores. Diba? So, z-score, kinoconsider to na base ng ating standard score since it is used for conversion to another type of standard score. So, here is the formula enable for you to compute the z-score of your raw score, diba? So, the non-linear or the normalized standard scores naman, ine-express nito in terms of distribution that has been transformed to fit a normal curve. Okay, so let's go now to t-score. Ano ba yung t-score? So, ang mean ng t-score, naka-fixed siya sa 50 at ang standard deviation niya ay 10. So, si t-score, mini-measure niya yung size ng difference relative to the variation of the sample data. So, si t-score, the more greater your t-score is, the greater the evidence against your null hypothesis. Diba? So, punta naman tayo sa STA9. Si STA9, ginagamit din siya enable for us to derive our raw score. Si STA9 kasi, ang scale niya ay 9-point scale. Ang disadvantage nga lang ng STA9, nagre-represent lang siya ng range of scores. And sometimes, people do not really understand that one number represent various raw scores. Ayun. So, punta tayo sa deviation IQs. Ito yung standard score with a mean of 100 and standard deviation that approximate the standard deviation din ng Stanford Binet distribution. It resembles an IQ scale because the use of 100. And si IQ deviation natin, ito yung way natin to measure individuals' generalized intelligence. And it is also used to analyze person's IQ relative to his or her chronological age. What is CEEB or the College Entrance Examination Board score? The raw score are converted to standard score with a mean of 500 and the standard deviation of 100. Scholastic assessment test and graduate record examination use CEEB score. Diba? Tinatranscribe nila in CEEB. And punta tayo sa correlational statistics. So it is concerned in determining the extent to which two sets of measures such as intelligence test scores and school grades are related. So for example, we have two variables, si happiness at saka si stress. Pwede nating gamitin ang correlational statistic in able to understand or to know kung meron ba silang relationship dalawa, di ba? And ang correlation coefficient natin is numerical index that describes the magnitude and direction of the relationship between two variables and it may be either positive or negative. So makikita natin dito yung description or yung interpretation kapag nakakuha tayo ng correlation coefficient. So ayan siya, makikita natin, ito siya. Yan. Ano naman yung coefficient of determination. So, itong coefficient of determination natin, ito yung squared value ng ating correlation coefficient and the proportion of the total variation in scores on y that we know as a function of information about the x variable. So, Pearson product moment correlation or the Pearson R is the most popular measure ng correlational statistics kasi ginagamit ito in variables that are interval or ratio type of measurement. Karaniwan naman sa mga psychological research natin, talaga interval at ratio yung mga data, 'di ba? And it ranges from -1, which means perfect inverse relationship, to +1, which means perfect direct relationship. And here is the formula in computing the Pearson R. But in research, kapag kinukuha namin yung Pearson R, gumagamit lang kami ng SPSS, di ba? Nakagamit na rin siguro kayo nun. But syempre, in statistics laboratory, tinuro sa atin kung paano i-compute yung Pearson R. So, the meaning of correlation. Ano ba yung correlation according to ICANN 2000? So, sabi niya, yung correlation implies predictability. The accuracy with which a person's score on measure Y can be predicted from his or her score on measure X depends on the magnitude of the correlation between two variables. So, the closer the correlation coefficient to absolute value of 1, either positive o ito o negative, the smaller the average of error, diba? In predicting the two variables. So, correlation also does not imply causation. Bakit? Pupunta tayo dyan. So, the fact that the two variables are significantly correlated facilitates predicting performance on one from performance on the other, but it provides no direct information on whether the two variables are usually connected. Kasi ano ba yung ginagamit natin? 'Di ba? Correlation lang. Ang correlation, hindi niya sinasagot kung bakit sila related to each other, yung variable natin. So, kapag ang ating data or yung variable natin ay correlated to each other, pwede natin gamitin yung regression para malaman natin kung bakit sila correlated to each other. So, simple linear regression can use to predict the values of one variable based on the other. And sabi dito, it is the procedure for determining the algebraic equation of the best fitting line for the predicting scores on a dependent variable. So, ibig sabihin, kung yung lumabas dun sa ating data, hindi related, for example, hindi related si anxiety at si happiness. So, no need na natin gumamit ng regression, 'di ba? Kasi wala naman tayong aalamin kung bakit sila naging correlated. So, ina-apply lang ito when our variables are related to each other. So, ano naman yung multiple regression analysis? Extension lang ito ng simple linear regression analysis to two or more variables. Diba? Kung marami na tayong variable na kinokorrelate, for example, intelligence, happiness, and stress, pwede na tayong gumamit ng multiple regression analysis if nakita natin na yung mga variables natin ay may correlation. Okay? So, let's go now to factor analysis. It is the mathematical procedure for analyzing a matrix of correlations among measurements to determine what factors or construct are sufficient to explain the correlation. Its major purpose is to reduce the number of variables. So, for example, si Cattell, sa kanyang 16 PF or the 16 personality factors, ang ginamit niya doon ay factor analysis kasi there are thousands of psychological traits na meron yung isang tao. And he believed na pwede naman itong i-divide lang into 16 basic dimensions. That's why na-create niya or na-publish niya yung isang famous psychological test for personality, which is the 16PF nga. So other statistical tools, the chi-square test for goodness of fit, 'di ba? The chi-square for independence, 'di ba? So review na lang 'yan kasi tinuro naman sa inyo 'yan in statistics. So let's go now to the characteristic of a good test. Kailan nga ba natin masasabi na yung test ay good test, 'di ba? According to kay Frydenberg 1995. So number one, dapat yung test natin dinedefine niya talaga yung purpose, 'di ba? Ano ba yung purpose ng test na 'to, 'di ba? It's about the knowledge ba, yung mini-measure, yung skill ba, yung behavior ba, yung attitude ba, or other characteristic. O kaya naman, who will take the test, 'di ba? So tingnan natin sino ba yung kukuha ng test na 'yon, 'di ba? Sino ba? Para lang ba 'yon sa elementary, for college ba 'yon, or for graduate school ba 'yon, graduate studies? So how will the test scores be used, 'di ba? So dapat in characterizing a good test, dapat malinaw din how to score the test, 'di ba? Appropriate ba siya, 'di ba? The items and the test scores. And number two, dapat specific siya and standard content. Ano ibig sabihin nito? Yung content niya dapat specific to the domain na mini-measure mo, 'di ba? For example, happiness, 'di ba? Tapos ilalagay mo doon, I feel so nervous whenever I stand in front of other people, 'di ba? So yun pa lang hindi na siya specific kasi ano yun, test for ano na yun for anxiety na yun. So kapag naman sinabi natin standard, all test takers are tested on the same attributes or knowledge. Yun nga yung sinasabi kanina. Tingnan mo muna yung test taker, 'di ba? Kung para kanino ba yun ginawa. So or ginagawa. So a good test is a set of standard administration procedures, 'di ba? Standard conditions are necessary to minimize the effects of irrelevant variables. For example, yung respondent mo na to sa tahimik na lugar mo siya pinag-exam, pero si isang examinee mo sa maingay, 'di ba? Maraming tao, maraming nakakagulo. So dapat yung pag-administer mo, administration procedure mo ay the same place lang, 'di ba? To all the respondents. And syempre, a good test has a standard scoring procedure, 'di ba? Hindi yung nangangapa yung gagamit ng test mo. So dapat meron siyang standard procedure. So punta naman tayo sa psychometric properties of a good test. So kapag sinabi na ang test mo ay reliable, 'di ba? It refers to the consistency of scores obtained by the same person when kapag nagre-test ulit siya, 'di ba? Or kaya may difference man, konti lang, maliit lang, 'di ba? Pag naman sinabi nating validity, may good validity ang iyong test, ibig sabihin nun, it really measure what is supposed to measure. Kagaya lang nung sinabi ko kanina, 'di ba? Test of happiness yung ginagawa mo, pero yung sa mga statements, 'di ba? May mga about sa test of anxiety, 'di ba? So, good item statistics. Item analysis, the process of statistically re-examining the qualities of each item of the test. It includes item difficulty index and the item discrimination index. Ano ba yung item difficulty and item discrimination? So, later, we will discuss this on the next slides. Test reliability, it refers to the accuracy or the consistency of measurement or the degree to which test scores are consistent, dependable, repeatable, and free from errors or free from bias. So, continuation tayo about reliability. So, reliability coefficient, numerical index between 0.00 to 1 of the reliability of an assessment instrument. It is based on the correlational between two independently derived set of scores. So, general model reliability, 'di ba? So, paano ba natin ma-observe si test score to 'di ba, through score and the errors of measurement. So, review na lang naman yan. Punta na tayo sa methods of obtaining reliability. So, kung to obtain reliability, dapat mag-conduct tayo ng ilan dito sa mga methods na to. Una, yung test-retest. Same test you have given to the respondents with time interval between testing. So, the error variance corresponds to the random fluctuating of performance. So, for example, itong si person A, pinag-test mo siya, and the following week, pinag-test mo ulit siya, the same test, pero sobrang laki ng difference ng kinalabasan ng score niya dun sa una niyang test at sa pangalawa niyang test. Ibig sabihin, hindi reliable ang iyong test. So, coefficiency of stability, and meron nga lang tayong problem sa test-retest kasi meron siyang memory effect or the practice effect. Pwede na yung respondent mo, nakabisado niya na yung tinanong mo nung una mo siyang pinag-take ng test. Kaya, nung pangalawang pinag-take mo siya, meron ng practice effect. Ibig sabihin, na-retain na sa mind niya yung mga sinagot niya the first time he answered the test. So, pangalawa naman, alternate form or the parallel form. So, isa to sa mahirap gawin kasi nga, you will make two tests given with time interval between testing. Ibig sabihin nun, yung one form, dapat ay equivalent siya dun sa second form, di ba? In the development of alternate form, need to ensure that they are truly parallel, di ba? Ang source of error naman nito ay yung ating item sampling. How about the coefficient of equivalence and coefficient of stability and consistency of response to different samples? Kaso meron din ditong problem sa alternate form or the parallel form. Hard to develop siya kasi gagawa ka nga naman ng two test na equivalent, di ba? Or magkapareho. Pero, sabi din dito, it may reflect change in behavior over time o kaya magkaroon din ng practice effect, di ba? The degree to which the nature of the test will change in repetition. Di ba? Maaaring bumaba yung reliability mo kasi iisipin ni respondent ni bakit na iba, di ba, yung test, pero magkaparehas lang yung sinusukat mo, di ba? So, internal consistency or alternate form. One test given at one time only. Two scores are obtained by dividing the test into comparable halves or the tinatawag nating split half method. Uses corrected correlation between two halves of the test. Temporal stability is not a problem because only one test session is involved. So, isang session lang yung test pero i-divide mo siya into two. Diba? Anong problem niyan? Uses shortened forms, diba? Kasi nga, for example, up to 20 lang yung items ng test mo. So, i-divide mo pa yon into two. Only good if traits are unitary or homogeneous, diba? And gives high estimate on a speeded test and many more. And pang-apat, yung KR20 or the Quader-Richardson reliability, inter-item consistency. Utilize naman ito in a single administration lang din siya of a single form. Kaso lang, dapat dito ay heterogeneous instrument yung ating gagamitin. And in KR20, KR21 for homogeneous naman. So, in terms of the problem, meron siyang two sources of problem, yung content sampling and yung heterogeneity of the behavior domain sample. So, let's go now to coefficient alpha or the Cronbach alpha, appropriate for instrument where the scoring is not dichotomous such as scales, di ba? Kasi yung KR20 ay dichotomous siya, di ba? And kaso lang, ang mahirap dito sa coefficient alpha or the Cronbach alpha, confusing yung homogeneity niya and high value. often improperly interpreted. Kaya dapat talagang careful. How about the inter-rater or inter-scorer reliability? So, ang procedure nito, we have different scorers or observers at sila yung nagre-rate ng ating item or yung responses sa test na ginawa natin. And this is subjective. Subjective ang pagre-rate nila. At yun, dun din nanggagaling yung problem natin. Kasi they have different different observation. Diba? Pwede yun. And enable for us to correct the split half reliability, pwede tayong gumamit ng Spearman-Brown formula to provide a good estimate of what the reliability coefficient will be. Punta naman tayo sa SEM or the standard error of measurement. Standard error of measurement is the estimate of the standard deviation of normal distribution. So, si SEM nagpo-provide siya ng band or ng range wherein the mean of this hypothetical score distribution is the person's true score on the test. And punta naman tayo sa test validity. This is the degree to which test measures what it purports to measure when compared with accepted criteria. So, number one, we can look at the face validity to make sure if the items look like they measure what they are supposed to measure. So, ang procedure niyan, it is made by the test takers, not by the test developers, yung face validity. How about the content validity? Dito, kino-compare natin whether the test items match the set of goals and objectives. Example niyan, maximal performance, test of typical performance, and many more. How about the criterion validity? So, si criterion validity, pine-predict naman niya yung performance on another measure or to predict individuals' behavior in a specific situation. Example niyan, aptitude test and ability test. How about the concurrent validity? Criterion measure obtained as same time lang. And example niyan, yung personality, yung employment, achievement, certification test. Yun. How about the criterion-related validity? It compare whether the test items match the set of goals and objectives. Example niyan, scholastic test. Diba? Kino-compare niya yung test blueprint. And dapat dito sa criterion-related validity, meron din tayong present na panel expert. How about the predictive validity? To have a test scores accurately predict the criterion performance identified. So, for example, yung college admission test, so, pine-predict dito kung kakayanin mo ba na, kunyari sa CAT, kakayanin mo ba na matapos, for example, ang choice mo na course ay psychology, di ba? So, pinipredict dito ni CAT kung kakayanin mo na matapos yung psychology in just 4 years, di ba? How about the construct validity? It is the extent to which a test measure a theoretical construct or trait, di ba? Example, intelligence, aptitude, and personality test. Punta naman tayo sa item analysis. Item analysis, it is the general term for procedures designed to assess the utility or the validity of a set of test items. So, each items, dumadaan yan sa item analysis, di ba? And the validity concerns the entire instrument while item analysis examines the qualities of each item, di ba? So, very masuri, ganun. So, let's go now to item difficulty index. Ano bang ibig sabihin ng item difficulty index? Si item difficulty index, sinusukat niya yung easiness or yung difficulty ng each item. It reflects the proportion of people getting the item correct calculated by dividing the number of individuals who answered the item correctly by the total number of people. So here is the solution enable for a researcher or the developer malaman yung item difficulty index, di ba? So, 0.00 meaning no one got the item correct and 1 meaning everyone got the item correct. Pero item difficulty actually indicate how easy the item is because it provides the proportion of individuals who got the item correct. So, ano naman yung item discrimination index? Dito, mini-measure nito yung bawat item din na i-discriminate natin or aalisin natin at yung mga item na ititira natin. 'Di ba? So, continuation. So, this is the index of item discriminating power. Ito yung formula niya, 'di ba? Si percentage who answered the item correctly, 'di ba? And the number of who answered the item correctly and the total number of who tried the item. Ito naman, so kapag 0.86 and above, very easy siya. So, hindi rin yun maganda sa test. Dapat din siyang i-discriminate. Pag naman 0.71 to 0.85, easy. Diba? Ibig sabihin to be revised. Diba? Revise mo muna yan. Baka sakali next time. And 0.30 to 0.70, moderate. Very good items na to. Ito yung mga item na tinatanggap in developing tests. 0.15 to 0.29, mahirap na siya to be revised yan. I-revise mo. And 0.14 below, very difficult na yung item at kailangan niya ng tanggalin. How about the IRT or the item response jury or the latent trait jury? So, itong IRT na to, ina-express lang nito yung in terms of estimated score on a latent ability. So, using IRT, we get an indication of individual's performance based not on the total score but on the precise item the person answers correctly. Pero during this, kasi, hindi na natin ganun ginagamit yung item response jury. Bakit naman po hindi na natin siya masyadong ginagamit? Kasi meron na tayong updated na jury enabled. Yan. Si IRT kasi each item talaga ay chine-check niya. At ngayon meron na din tayong ginagamit yung classical test jury kung saan hindi siya ganon diwara unlike IRT. So, item characteristic curve, a graph used in item analysis in which the proportion of examinees passing a specified item is plotted against total test score. How about the item response curve, constructed by plotting the proportion of respondents who give keyed response against estimates or of their true standing. And the Rush model, one parameter model for scaling tests, items for purpose of item analysis and test standardization. So, yung model na to, meron siyang assumption kung saan indexes of guessing and item discrimination are negligible parameter na no need na daw na mag-conduct tayo ng item discrimination. And it relates examinees' performance on test items to their estimated standing on hypothetical latent ability trait or continuum. So that ends our discussion for the Module 2. Thank you for listening and sana meron kayong natutunan sa ating discussion for a thorough understanding. Thank you so much for listening. Happy virtual learning and God bless everyone.